Rainlight. The rain wrote its own story against the glass, each drop a comma in the long sentence of the night. She sat by the window, cigarette burning down to thought, the smoke curling like memory. The typewriter waited, patient, metallic, half-shadowed, as if it knew the words would come only when the silence was ready to break. Her reflection in the window looked softer than she felt, a ghost of herself caught between the world outside and the one she was trying to write. Somewhere beyond the rain, the city hummed, indifferent, alive, and she wondered if every story began like this, with a pause, a breath, and the ache of something unsaid. Rainlight, Part 2. The typewriter stared back at her, a patient beast of iron and intention. She tapped the cigarette against the edge of the ashtray, watching the ember flare, then dim. Outside, the rain thickened, turning the window into a trembling mirror. Her reflection hovered there, softer, almost kinder, as if the version of herself in the glass knew something she didn't. She reached for the first sheet of paper. It felt heavier tonight, as though the story waiting to be written had weight of its own. She fed it into the typewriter, the metal teeth gripping it with a soft click. A breath, a pause. The city exhaled somewhere far below. She began to type. The keys struck like footsteps in an empty hallway. Deliberate, echoing, a little lonely. Words formed, hesitant at first, then steadier, as if they'd been waiting for the rain to give them permission. He arrived on a night like this, she wrote. The kind of night that blurred the edges of things. Streets, memories, intentions. She stopped. The cigarette burned down between her fingers. She hadn't meant to write about him. Not tonight. Not after all this time. But stories had their own gravity. She leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath her. The rain outside softened, turning from percussion to whisper. Her reflection in the window seemed to lean closer, as if urging her on. She typed again. He carried the storm with him, even when the sky was clear. Some people do. Some people are weather. A shiver traced her spine. Not fear, not quite nostalgia, but something in between. The kind of feeling that made a writer dangerous to herself. She reached for the cigarette, found only a thin curl of smoke. She lit another, the flame briefly illuminating her face in the glass. For a moment, she looked like a stranger. For a moment, she looked like the woman she used to be. The typewriter waited, and she kept going. Rainlight, Part 3. The words gathered speed, as if the storm outside had slipped into her bloodstream. She typed until the cigarette burned down to its final ember, then crushed it out and lit another without thinking. The room smelled of smoke and rain and old paper, the scent of every night she'd ever tried to outrun. He didn't knock, she wrote. He never did. He walked into a room the way weather changes, quietly at first, then all at once. Her fingers hesitated over the keys. She could almost hear it, the soft click of a door latch, the hush of wet footsteps on the hallway floorboards. Memory or imagination? She wasn't sure anymore. The line between them had thinned over the years, worn down by regret and the kind of longing she never admitted aloud. A gust of wind rattled the window. Her reflection trembled with it, as if the woman in the glass were bracing for something she already knew was coming. She typed again, slower now. He carried the scent of rain with him, even when the sky was dry. And trouble, the kind that didn't announce itself until it was already sitting across from you, asking for a light. She stopped. Her breath caught in her throat, because she remembered that night, the real one, too clearly. The way he'd stood in her doorway, dripping rain onto the floorboards, eyes shadowed with something he wouldn't name. The way he'd said her name like it was both a warning and an apology. She pushed the memory aside and kept writing. He said he needed a place to think, but thinking was never what he came for. Not really. The typewriter keys stilled. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. She rose from the chair and walked to the window. The rain had softened to a mist, the city lights smearing into soft halos. Her reflection hovered beside her, pale, thoughtful, a woman caught between past and present. Behind her, the typewriter waited, and then a sound, soft, familiar, the faintest click of metal meeting wood. She turned. The door was closed, but the air had shifted, the way it does when someone has just stepped into a room or just stepped out of one. Her pulse quickened. Maybe it was only the building settling. Maybe it was nothing at all, but she knew better. Some stories don't stay on the page. Some have a way of finding their way back to you, no matter how many years you've tried to write them out of your life. She returned to the typewriter, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keys. This time, the words came easily. He was back. Rainlight. Part 4. She didn't move at first. The room held its breath with her, the way a page holds still before the next line is written. The typewriter sat in front of her like a witness, the unfinished sentence, waiting for its verdict. Another sound, softer this time, almost polite, a whisper of weight against the floorboards in the hall. Her pulse tapped once, twice, a quiet staccato beneath her ribs. She rose from the chair, the legs scraping gently against the wood. The rain outside had thinned to a mist, the city lights smearing into pale halos. Her reflection in the window watched her stand, watched her hesitate, watched her try to decide whether she was the woman she used to be or the one she'd spent years trying to become. She crossed the room. The hallway beyond the door was silent, but not empty. Silence had a shape, and tonight it felt like a man leaning against the wall just out of sight, arms folded, waiting for her to open the door first. She rested her hand on the knob. For a moment, she let herself imagine it wasn't him, that it was a neighbor, or a mistake, or the building settling, that the past didn't have the audacity to knock. But the past never knocked. It returned exactly the way he did, quietly at first, then all at once. She opened the door. The hallway was dim, lit only by the flickering bulb at the far end. The air smelled faintly of rain and something else. Something familiar, something she hadn't let herself remember in years. He wasn't there, but his presence was. A single envelope lay on the floor, the paper damp at the edges, her name written in a hand she knew too well. Ink slightly smudged, as if he'd written it in a hurry. Or in the rain. She bent to pick it up. The hallway hummed with the building's old pipes, but beneath that, she could swear she heard footsteps retreating down the stairwell. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. She straightened, the envelope trembling slightly between her fingers. Back inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, letting the quiet settle around her like dust. The typewriter waited across the room, the unfinished sentence glowing faintly in the lamplight. She turned the envelope over. No return address, no seal, just her name. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. She unfolded it with the care of someone handling a memory that might break. One line, just one. We need to talk. Her breath caught, not in fear, not in longing, but in the sharp, undeniable recognition that the story she'd been trying to write was no longer hers alone. Outside, the rain began again. Rainlight. Part 5. She read the line again. We need to talk. The words were simple, almost gentle, but they carried the weight of every night she tried to forget him. She folded the paper slowly, as if the act itself might steady her pulse, then set it beside the typewriter. The metal keys glinted faintly in the lamplight, waiting for her to decide whether this was a story she wanted to write or one she'd be dragged into regardless. She paced the room once, twice. The rain outside softened to a hush, the kind that made the city feel farther away than it was. Her reflection in the window watched her move, a ghost pacing in parallel, mirroring her indecision. She lit another cigarette. The flame flickered, caught, steadied. Smoke curled upward, soft and slow, like a thought forming. He had been gone for years, long enough for her to rebuild the parts of herself he'd once undone, long enough to convince herself she didn't care where he'd gone or why he'd left without a word. But the truth was quieter than that, and far more stubborn. She cared. She always had. She sat at the desk again, the chair creaking beneath her. The typewriter waited, the unfinished sentence staring back at her like a question she wasn't ready to answer. She placed her fingers on the keys. Not to write, not yet, but to feel the weight of the moment. The metal was cool beneath her fingertips, grounding her in a way nothing else could. She unfolded the note once more. We need to talk. No time, no place, no explanation, which meant one thing. He wanted her to find him. She leaned back, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls had drawn closer, listening. The rain tapped lightly against the window, a soft percussion urging her to move, to choose, to act. She stood again, this time with purpose. Her coat hung by the door, the dark one, the one she wore on nights when she didn't want to be seen. She slipped it on, the fabric settling around her like a second skin. She tucked the note into her pocket, grabbed her keys, and paused with her hand on the doorknob. For a moment, she let herself feel the weight of what she was about to do. Then she opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of rain and something else. Something familiar, something that made her pulse quicken. She locked the door behind her. Whatever story he'd brought back into her life, she wasn't going to let it unfold without her. Not this time. RAINLIGHT, Part 6. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and old secrets. She descended slowly, her hand gliding along the cold metal railing, each step echoing faintly in the hollow shaft. The building was quiet at this hour, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel deliberate. On the second-floor landing, she paused. A faint smear of water darkened the floorboards near the exit door. Not a puddle, just a trace. A footprint blurred by motion. Someone had passed through recently. Someone who hadn't bothered to wipe the rain from their shoes. Her pulse tightened. She pushed through the door and stepped into the alley behind the building. The rain had eased into a fine mist, drifting like breath across the dim streetlights. The city felt suspended, as if waiting for her to make the next move. She scanned the alley. Nothing but shadows, dumpsters, and the distant hum of traffic. But the air carried a familiar note. The faint scent of his cologne, softened by rain and time. She followed it instinctively, the way one follows a half-remembered melody. At the mouth of the alley, something caught her eye. A matchbook. She crouched, lifting it between two fingers. The cover was damp but intact. Black with silver lettering. The Lantern Room. A bar on the edge of the old district. A place where stories went to hide. A place he used to haunt when the world felt too sharp. She flipped it open. Inside, a single match remained, and beneath it, written in the same hurried hand as the note, midnight. She checked her watch. 11:07. He wasn't giving her much time. She slipped the matchbook into her coat pocket and stepped out onto the street. The city stretched before her, wet pavement gleaming, neon signs flickering, the night alive with the quiet promise of trouble. She hailed a cab. As it pulled up, she hesitated for the briefest moment, her hand on the door handle. She could still turn back. She could go upstairs, lock the door, and pretend the envelope had never arrived. But she knew she wouldn't. Some stories don't let you walk away. Some pull you back in, no matter how far you've run. She slid into the cab. The Lantern Room, she said. The driver nodded and pulled into the street, the city lights smearing across the windows as they moved. She leaned back, the note in her pocket burning like a second heartbeat. Midnight was coming, and so was he. RAINLIGHT, Part 7. The cab rolled to a stop at the corner of Mercer and Fifth, where the street narrowed into a corridor of old brick and flickering neon. The Lantern Room sign buzzed faintly above the door, a silver lantern etched into black glass, glowing like a secret someone meant to keep but couldn't. She paid the driver and stepped out into the mist. The pavement shimmered under the streetlights, each puddle catching a distorted reflection of the world above it. The air smelled of wet asphalt, cigarette smoke, and the faint metallic tang of something about to happen. She paused beneath the awning. The lantern room had always been a place where stories went to hide. Dim corners, low ceilings, a bar polished by decades of elbows and confessions. He used to sit in the back booth, the one beneath the broken sconce that flickered like a heartbeat. She wondered if he'd chosen it tonight. She wondered if he'd chosen anything at all. Inside, the bar was half lit, half asleep. A jazz record crackled from the old turntable behind the counter, the trumpet low and mournful. A few patrons nursed their drinks in silence, their faces half lost in shadow. She slipped inside, letting the door close softly behind her. The bartender glanced up, a man with tired eyes and a towel slung over one shoulder. He didn't smile, but he didn't need to. This was the kind of place where recognition was its own greeting. "You're early," he said, polishing a glass without looking away from her. Her pulse tightened. "Early for what?" He nodded toward the back booth. "For whoever left this." He reached beneath the counter and slid a small object across the bar. A key. Old brass, worn smooth, tied to a strip of black leather. No tag, no number. Her breath caught. He'd left her a trail, another breadcrumb, another choice. She picked up the key, feeling its weight settle into her palm. "When did he leave it?" she asked. The bartender shrugged. 10 minutes ago, maybe less. Didn't say a word. Just set it down and walked out." "Which way?" "Toward the river." Of course he had. The river was where he always went when he needed to disappear. Or reappear. She turned toward the back booth anyway, drawn by habit, by memory, by the ghost of him that still lingered in the air. The broken sconce flickered above it, casting a trembling halo of light across the cracked leather seat. She slid into the booth. The table was empty, but the air felt warm, as if someone had been sitting there moments before, as if he'd waited for her, as if he'd almost stayed. She set the key on the table and stared at it, the brass catching the dim light. A key to what? A room? A locker? A past she wasn't sure she wanted to unlock? The jazz record crackled. The rain outside thickened. The bartender poured a drink for someone who didn't say thank you. She closed her hand around the key. If he wanted her to follow, she would. But not blindly, not anymore. She stood, slipped the key into her coat pocket, and headed for the door. The night outside felt sharper now, the mist colder, the city more awake. "Toward the river," the bartender had said. She stepped into the street, the rain settling on her coat like a second skin. Whatever he was leading her towards, she was already in motion. And the night, dark, patient, listening, moved with her. RAINLIGHT, Part 8. The river district always felt like another city entirely. Quieter, older, as if time moved differently along the water. She stepped out of the cab and into the hush of the docks, where the mist hung low and the lamps cast long, trembling reflections across the pavement. The river itself was a dark ribbon, restless under the wind. Barges creaked against their moorings. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn groaned like a warning no one intended to heed. She pulled her coat tighter and scanned the street. Nothing moved. But the key in her pocket felt heavier now, as if it knew exactly where it belonged. She walked along the waterfront, her footsteps muffled by the damp. The buildings here were old warehouses and forgotten offices, their windows dark, their doors locked. Except, halfway down the block, a single light glowed above a narrow side entrance. A weak bulb, flickering, barely holding on. The kind of light someone leaves on when they want to be found, but not by everyone. She approached slowly. The door beneath the bulb was metal, rusted at the edges, with a small brass lock that looked far too new for a place like this. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key. It fit. Of course it did. She hesitated, her breath catching in the cold air. The river murmured behind her, the city humming faintly beyond that. She could still turn back. She could still pretend she hadn't seen the envelope, hadn't followed the trail, hadn't let the past tug her by the sleeve. But she turned the key anyway. The lock clicked open with a soft, decisive sound. Inside, the room was dim, a single lamp on a desk, casting a pool of warm light across scattered papers. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and rain-soaked wool. A coat hung on the back of a chair. His coat. She knew it instantly. Her pulse tightened. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The room was small, a converted office maybe, with a window overlooking the river. Papers lay across the desk in a haphazard sprawl. Maps, receipts, photographs. She moved closer, her eyes adjusting to the low light. A photograph lay at the center of the desk. Her breath stilled. It was a picture of her building, taken from across the street, the angle unmistakable. Another photo beneath it showed her window, the one she'd been sitting beside earlier that night. Cigarette in hand, reflection in the glass. He'd been watching. Not tonight. Longer. She swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she lifted the next photograph. This one wasn't of her, it was of him, standing on a street corner, looking over his shoulder, expression tense. Behind him, blurred in the background, was a figure she didn't recognize. Tall, dark coat, face obscured. She set the photo down. Whatever he dragged her into, he wasn't running from her. He was running from someone else. And now she was in it too. A floorboard creaked behind her. She froze. The room held its breath. Slowly she turned. A shadow filled the doorway. Not him. Someone else. RAINLIGHT. Part 9. The figure in the doorway didn't move at first. He stood half in shadow, half in the weak spill of lamplight, as if undecided about which world he belonged to. Tall, broad-shouldered, a coat still wet from the rain. His face was obscured, not by accident, but by intention. She didn't speak, neither did he. The silence stretched, taut as wire. Then he stepped forward. The light caught the lower half of his face, a strong jaw, a faint scar near the corner of his mouth. The kind of detail that suggested a history no one walked away from clean. His eyes remained in shadow, unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was low, steady, and unfamiliar. Not him, not the man she'd come looking for, but someone who knew him. She kept her posture still, her breath even. "I could say the same about you." He glanced at the desk. The photographs, the maps, the scattered evidence of a life unraveling. His jaw tightened. "So you've seen it." "I've seen enough." He stepped closer, and she caught the faint scent of rain and gunmetal. Not cologne, not warmth. Something colder. "You need to leave," he said. "Now." She didn't move. "Tell me where he is." A muscle in his cheek twitched, the first crack in his composure. "He didn't want you involved." "He involved me the moment he left that note." The stranger exhaled slowly, as if weighing the cost of honesty. He reached into his coat, not fast, not threatening, but deliberate, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He set it on the desk beside the photographs. "He said you'd come," the man murmured. "Said you'd be too stubborn to stay away." She ignored the sting of recognition. "Where is he?" The stranger shook his head. "Not safe. Not for him. Not for you." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them by a fraction. "I'm not leaving without answers." For the first time, he looked directly at her. His eyes were dark, sharp, and tired. The eyes of someone who'd been running too long and had no illusions left. "You want answers?" he said. "Then you need to understand something." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "He's not hiding from you. He's hiding because of you." The room seemed to tilt, the air thinning around her. "What does that mean?" But the stranger was already stepping back, retreating toward the door. "Take the paper," he said, "and don't follow me." He slipped into the hallway before she could stop him, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that felt like a warning. She stood alone in the dim room, the river whispering against the docks outside. Slowly, she reached for the folded paper he'd left. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single address, and beneath it, written in the same hurried hand she knew too well. If you're reading this, it's already begun. The lamp flickered. The river groaned. And somewhere in the city, the man she'd once loved was running out of time. Rainlight, Part 10. For a long moment, she didn't move. The shadow in the doorway had vanished, leaving the room colder than before. The lamp flickered once, twice, as if straining to hold back the dark. She stood alone with the photographs, the maps, the note, and the address that felt like a fuse waiting to be lit. She folded the paper and slipped it into her coat, the key in her pocket pressed against her hip. A reminder that she'd crossed a threshold she couldn't uncross. The river whispered outside, restless and low. She stepped back into the hallway, closing the door behind her. The lock clicked softly, sealing the room and its secrets away. The mist had thickened, curling around the street lamps like smoke. She walked toward the main road, her footsteps echoing faintly on the wet pavement. The address was only a few blocks away. A warehouse district, abandoned for years. The kind of place where people went when they didn't want to be found, or when they wanted to make sure someone else wasn't. As she approached the building, she felt it before she saw it. A shift in the air, a tension humming beneath the quiet. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows dark, its brick walls slick with rain. A single light glowed above a side door, weak and trembling. She hesitated, then she pushed the door open. Inside, the space was cavernous, lit only by a few hanging bulbs that buzzed faintly. The air smelled of dust, oil, and something metallic. Footsteps echoed somewhere in the distance. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. She followed the sound. Rows of crates lined the floor, casting long shadows. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just around the corner. She stepped forward, and there he was. He stood with his back to her, coat damp, shoulders tense. His hair was longer than she remembered, darker at the ends from the rain. He turned slowly, as if he'd known she was there all along. Their eyes met. For a moment, the years between them collapsed. The nights, the silence, the unanswered questions. His face was older, sharper, marked by something she couldn't name. But his eyes were the same. "You came," he said softly. She swallowed. "You left me a trail." He gave a faint, tired smile. "I knew you'd follow it." She stepped closer, the warehouse swallowing the sound of her footsteps. "What's going on? Who was that man?" His expression darkened. "Someone who thinks he knows the story. Someone who doesn't understand what's at stake." "And what is at stake?" He hesitated. A long, heavy pause that told her the truth was worse than she imagined. Finally, he spoke. "They're not after me," he said. "They're after what I found." She felt the air shift. "What did you find?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, weathered notebook. Leather-bound, edges frayed, pages swollen from rain. He held it out to her, but didn't let go. "This," he said, "is why I left, and why I came back." She stared at the notebook, her pulse quickening. "What's in it?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Names, dates, deals that were never meant to see daylight, and one entry that changes everything." She felt the weight of the moment settle around them. What entry? He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw fear there. "Yours." The warehouse hummed with silence. The rain outside thickened, and she realized the story she thought she was chasing had been chasing her all along. Rainlight, Part 11. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Her name, written in his hand, buried in a notebook full of secrets, felt like a door swinging open in a house she didn't know she'd been living in. She stared at him, the warehouse lights flickering overhead like a failing heartbeat. Explain, she said. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the notebook gently on a nearby crate, as if it were something fragile, something alive. His hands lingered on the cover, trembling just enough for her to notice. It's not what you think, he said. Then tell me what it is. He exhaled, a long, tired breath that seemed to carry years with it. I didn't go looking for this. I stumbled into it. And once I did, I couldn't walk away. She stepped closer, the shadows shifting around them. What does any of that have to do with me? He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, sketches, dates, addresses. Some entries were smudged by rain, others by something that looked suspiciously like blood. He flipped through until he reached a page marked by a torn corner. Her name was written at the top. Not just her name, her address, her workplace, the cafe she used to visit every Thursday, the route she walked home in winter when the streets were too icy for cabs. Her stomach tightened. Why is this here? He looked at her and the fear in his eyes was no longer subtle. Because someone's been watching you, long before I came back. The room seemed to tilt. Who? He shook his head. I don't know, but they're connected to everything in this book. Deals, payoffs, disappearances, and your name shows up more than once. She felt the cold seep into her bones. Why me? That's what I've been trying to figure out. He turned another page. This one held a photograph. Grainy, taken from a distance. Her leaving her building. Her crossing the street. Her sitting by the window with a book in her lap. She swallowed hard. How long? Years, he said quietly. Maybe longer. The warehouse hummed with the sound of distant machinery, the river groaning against the docks outside. She felt suddenly exposed, as if the walls themselves were watching. And you didn't tell me? She whispered. I couldn't, he said. Not until I knew what they wanted. Not until I knew how deep this went. And now? He closed the notebook. Now it's too late. A chill ran through her. What do you mean? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. The man you saw tonight, the one who left before you arrived. He's not the only one looking for this notebook, and he's not the worst of them. She felt her pulse quicken. So what happens now? He hesitated, a long, heavy pause that told her the truth was about to change everything. Now, he said, we run. Before she could respond, a sound split the air. Sharp, metallic, echoing through the warehouse. A door slamming open. Footsteps, multiple, coming fast. He grabbed her hand. Too late, he whispered, and the shadows around them began to move. RAINLIGHT, Part 12. The footsteps multiplied. Heavy, fast, purposeful. Not the hesitant tread of someone searching. The confident stride of people who already knew exactly where to go. He tightened his grip on her hand. Move, he whispered. They ran. The warehouse swallowed their footsteps, the sound bouncing off metal and concrete. Shadows lunged across the floor as the overhead bulbs flickered, struggling to stay alive. Behind them, voices rose. Sharp commands clipped and urgent. She didn't look back. He led her through a maze of crates, past rusted machinery and abandoned work tables. The air smelled of oil and dust and something electric. Fear, maybe, or adrenaline. The notebook thumped against his coat with every stride. A shout echoed behind them. They're close, she said, breathless. They were always close. He yanked open a side door and pulled her into a narrow corridor. The walls were damp, the floor slick with condensation. A single emergency light glowed red at the far end, casting the hallway in a hellish tint. Where does this lead? She asked. Out, he said. If we're lucky. And if we're not? He didn't answer. They sprinted down the corridor. The emergency light flickered, then steadied. The footsteps behind them grew louder, boots hitting concrete in perfect rhythm. She could feel the chase tightening, the way a noose tightens around a throat. At the end of the corridor, he shoved open another door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of the river. They stumbled onto a metal catwalk suspended above the water, the wind slicing through the mist. Below them, the river churned, dark, restless, unforgiving. "This way," he said, pulling her toward a staircase that spiraled down to the docks. But halfway down, a figure stepped out from behind a support beam. The same man from the office. The one who'd warned her. The one who'd said she shouldn't be here. He held a gun now. Low, steady, not yet raised. "Stop," he said. Her pulse hammered. He looked at her first, not him. His eyes were sharp, urgent, almost pleading. "You need to listen," the man said. "You don't understand what he's done." Her breath caught. Who has done? The man's gaze flicked to the one holding her hand. "Him!" The wind howled between them, carrying the river's cold breath. He stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. "Don't listen to him." The man with the gun shook his head. "He's lying to you. He's been lying from the start." The metal beneath their feet vibrated, more footsteps approaching from above. They were running out of time. "Put the gun down," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I can't," he replied. "Not until you hear the truth." The man beside her tightened his grip on her hand. "Don't," he whispered. "He'll twist everything." The gunman's jaw clenched. "Ask him why your name is in that notebook. Ask him why he didn't tell you sooner. Ask him what he's really running from." The wind whipped her hair across her face. The river roared below. She looked at the man she'd followed through the night. The man she'd once loved. The man who'd left her a trail of secrets and shadows. "Tell me," she said softly. "Tell me the truth." He didn't answer. Not right away. And that silence, that single heavy beat of hesitation, was louder than any gunshot.